Hello dear listener, please subscribe to our channel. Enjoy watching. Let me start this off by saying that I never thought I'd be the guy to get revenge. The idea of it felt too dramatic. But things change when you're pushed far enough. When betrayal slices you so deep, you don't feel the pain until much later. Then, all you want is to make them feel it too. Marissa and I had been married for 10 years. 10 good years, or at least that's what I thought. We had a decent life. I worked as a construction foreman, and she worked in accounting. It wasn't glamorous, but we had a house in the suburbs, 2 kids who adored us, and, for the most part, we were happy, or at least I was. It all started to unravel about a year ago when Marissa got that promotion. She was always ambitious, more so than me. While I was content with stability, she wanted more money, more power, more everything. So, when she told me she got the job as the assistant to the regional manager at her insurance company, I was happy for her. I really was. But then came the late nights. The work trips. The increasingly vague explanations about where she was going and why. "Tony, I have to work late again," she would say, kissing me on the cheek as she grabbed her purse. "Don't wait up." I shrugged it off the first few times. Work is work, right? But then came the little things that made my gut twist in ways I couldn't ignore, like the way she'd be texting late at night, hiding her phone when I walked into the room. Or how she'd come home smelling like a different cologne than the one I wore. Then there was Jared. He was her new boss, tall, good-looking, with that kind of fake charm you see in guys who think they're better than everyone else. I met him once at a company picnic, and even then, I didn't like the way he looked at her, like she was his property. Marissa was all smiles around him, but I figured it was just work, just the boss-employee dynamic. I didn't want to be that jealous husband. But the late nights started to turn into entire weekends. There were conferences that came up out of nowhere, trips to headquarters that didn't seem to have any real purpose. And every time, it was Jared leading the charge. "You're being paranoid," she'd say when I confronted her about it. "It's just work, Tony. I can't help that my job is demanding." But something was off, and deep down, I knew it. I just didn't want to admit it. Then came the seminar. "I'm going out of town for 3 days," Marissa said one night, casually dropping the news over dinner like it was no big deal. "It's for work, a mandatory seminar. I'll be back by Sunday night." "Where's it at?" I asked, trying to sound indifferent. My fork hovered over my plate, but I didn't have much of an appetite. "Just upstate," she said with a shrug. "Jared's going, and a few others from the department." Jared. The mention of his name made my skin crawl. There was something in the way she said it, too nonchalant, too rehearsed. I glanced over at her, but she was focused on cutting her steak like nothing was wrong. "That's a lot of trips lately," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Don't you think it's weird that you're constantly going places with this guy?" Marissa rolled her eyes. "Come on, Tony. You know how it is. I've told you a million times, this job is demanding. Jared's just my boss. Don't turn this into something it's not." But the knot in my stomach tightened. I didn't believe her. Not anymore. So, when she left for her seminar the next morning, I didn't go to work. Instead, I followed her. Call me crazy, but my gut had been screaming at me for months, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I knew she wasn't telling the whole truth, and I had to find out for myself. I waited outside the house, hidden behind the wheel of my old truck, as Marissa packed her bags and kissed the kids goodbye. When she pulled out of the driveway, I followed her from a safe distance, careful not to get too close. She drove north for about an hour, heading toward the countryside where the seminar was supposed to be. But then something strange happened. She didn't go to a hotel or a conference center. She didn't even stop in town. Instead, she took a turn down a narrow road that led to a private cabin by the lake, a secluded spot that you'd only know about if you were familiar with the area. And when she got out of the car, Jared was already there, waiting for her. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched them embrace. They didn't even try to hide it. She laughed as he pulled her into a kiss, like she was a different person, someone I didn't recognize. The anger that had been simmering inside me for months boiled over, but I didn't act on it. Not yet. I waited. For hours, I watched from a distance as they spent the day together at the cabin, completely unaware that I was there. The whole time, I kept thinking about our life, our kids, the years we spent building a family together. I thought about the lies, the deception, the betrayal. And I knew what I had to do. That night, while they slept inside the cabin, I made my move. It was almost too easy. I had brought everything I needed, gloves, a flashlight, and the crowbar I kept in the truck. I parked a few 100 feet away and walked through the trees, staying out of sight. The cabin was small, only one story, with a single light on in the living room. They were asleep in the bedroom when I got there. I started by slashing the tires on Jared's car. There was no way he was getting out of there when I was done. Then I moved to the back of the cabin, where I could see through the window into the bedroom. They were lying in bed, fast asleep, her head resting on his chest like they didn't have a care in the world. I could feel the rage building inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to storm in there and do something stupid. No, this had to be methodical. They had to pay for what they did, and I wanted to make sure they felt every second of it. I waited until midnight, the dead of night when everything was still. Then I moved in. The back door was unlocked, amateurs. I slipped inside, careful not to make a sound. The cabin was small enough that I could hear their breathing from the other room, steady and slow. They had no idea I was there. I made my way to the bedroom door, gripping the crowbar tightly in my hand. My heart was racing, but I wasn't nervous. I was angry. Angry at her for betraying me, angry at him for thinking he could take what was mine. With one swift motion, I kicked the door open. They woke up instantly, Marissa gasping in shock as she saw me standing there, silhouetted in the doorway. Jared scrambled out of bed, his eyes wide with fear. But before he could even react, I swung the crowbar, hitting him square in the ribs. He let out a pained grunt and collapsed to the floor, clutching his side. "Tony, stop!" Marissa screamed, jumping out of bed. But I didn't stop. Not until Jared was lying on the floor, broken and beaten, begging for mercy. "You think you can just walk away from this?" I spat, standing over him. "You think you can take my wife and get away with it?" Jared didn't say a word. He was too busy gasping for air, blood dripping from his mouth. Marissa was sobbing, her hands shaking as she tried to pull me away. "Tony, please," she cried. "This isn't what you think. Please, just stop." But I didn't care what she had to say. I was done with her lies. I stepped back, catching my breath as I stared down at the mess I had made. Jared was a wreck, barely conscious, and Marissa was on her knees, pleading with me to stop. But I wasn't finished yet. "You've ruined everything," I said, my voice cold and steady. "You've destroyed our family. And now, you're going to pay for it." I wasn't going to kill them. That would have been too easy. No, they needed to live with what they'd done, to suffer the consequences of their betrayal. And I was going to make sure they never forgot it. I grabbed Marissa by the arm, dragging her toward the door. She screamed, trying to pull away, but I was stronger. "We're going home," I said, my grip tightening around her wrist. "And you're going to tell the kids what you did." Jared groaned from the floor, but he didn't try to stop me. He knew he was beaten. I dragged Marissa out of the cabin, leaving Jared behind. His car was useless now, and I knew it would be hours before anyone found him. By then, I'd be long gone. We drove in silence, and the silence was deafening. Marissa sat in the passenger seat, shaking. I could feel her eyes darting to me, but she didn't say a word. What could she say? What excuse could possibly explain away months of lies and betrayal? I didn't need her to confess. I had seen it all with my own eyes. We were halfway back to the house when I finally spoke, my voice low and steady. "Why, Marissa?" She didn't answer at first. I kept my eyes on the road, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The streetlights cast fleeting shadows on her tear-streaked face, illuminating her guilt. "Tony," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I didn't want this. It just happened." That was the worst part, how easy she made it sound, how casually she brushed off what she had done as though it were some kind of accident, something she just fell into without meaning to. An affair doesn't just happen. It's built on choices, decisions made day after day, lie after lie. "You destroyed our family for this?" I said, bitterness lacing every word. "For him?" Marissa wiped her eyes, looking down at her lap. "I didn't mean to hurt you. You just what?" I snapped, finally turning to face her. "You just decided I wasn't enough? You just thought it was okay to sneak around behind my back with some asshole from work?" Her lip trembled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to break down, but she stayed quiet. I shook my head, disgusted. There was nothing left to say. We drove the rest of the way in silence. When we pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. The kids were still at my mom's, thank God. I wasn't ready for them to see us. Marissa didn't move as I parked the truck, staring blankly out the window like she was trying to figure out what to do next. But I knew what I was going to do. "You have two choices," I said, my voice cold as steel. "You can stay here, pack your things, and be gone by morning. Or you can tell the kids why you're leaving. Either way, this is over." Marissa's eyes snapped to mine, wide and terrified. "Tony, please," I cut her off with a shake of my head. "You made your choice, Marissa. Now live with it." I got out of the truck and slammed the door behind me, heading straight for the house without looking back. I didn't care where she went. All I knew was that she wasn't staying here. Not anymore. The front door clicked shut behind me, and the quiet of the house settled over me like a heavy weight. I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the darkened windows, the memories of the life we'd built together flashing through my mind. Birthdays, holidays, family dinners, everything that once felt so solid now felt like a lie. The anger inside me had burned itself out, leaving nothing but cold, hollow numbness. I didn't care what happened to Marissa now. I didn't care about Jared, lying broken in that cabin. All I cared about were my kids, and how I was going to pick up the pieces of their lives after this. It wasn't until an hour later that I heard the front door open and close softly. I glanced toward the hallway and saw Marissa standing there with a small suitcase in hand, her face pale and drawn. She didn't say anything as she walked toward the door. She didn't plead, didn't beg for forgiveness. She knew better than to try. She paused at the door for a moment, her hand hovering over the knob. "Tony." "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at her. And after a moment, she was gone. For weeks after she left, it was like a shadow hung over the house. The kids didn't understand at first. I told them their mom had to go away for a while, and I did my best to keep things normal. But they weren't stupid. They could tell something was wrong, and soon the questions started coming, questions I wasn't ready to answer. The worst part was trying to explain why their mother wasn't coming back. Terry, my oldest, kept asking if it was his fault, if he had done something to make her leave. It broke my heart every time. I wanted to tell them the truth, but how do you explain betrayal to a child? How do you tell them their mother chose someone else over their family? Eventually, I filed for divorce. I had to. There was no way to fix what had been broken. Marissa never contested it. In fact, she didn't show up to any of the hearings. By the time the papers were signed, she had moved out of state with Jared. They didn't last long, from what I heard. Maybe he got tired of her lies, too. Life moved on, but the scars remained. I tried to give the kids as much normalcy as I could, but there were days when I could see the hurt in their eyes, the questions they still had but didn't ask. It wasn't easy, but we managed. We survived. One night, about a year after the divorce, I found myself standing in the doorway of my son's room, watching them sleep. Terry and Rick were snuggled up in their beds, their faces peaceful in the glow of the nightlight. For a moment, I felt something close to peace. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was enough. I stood there for a long time, just listening to their soft breathing, thinking about everything that had happened, the lies, the betrayal, the revenge. In the end, it hadn't given me the satisfaction I thought it would. It hadn't made things right. But it had given me something else. Closure. As I turned off the light and closed the door behind me, I realized that was enough. And maybe, just maybe, it was all I ever really needed. If you leave a comment, tell us what you think about the story you heard. It's important to us and will help us find and tell stories that you find interesting. Thank you for watching us.